The price of power. Michael Corleone had always known there was a price to be paid for power. As the head of the Corleone family, he had built an empire, eliminating enemies and consolidating control over his world. But in his quest for power, Michael had lost everything that truly mattered: his family, his soul, and perhaps his sanity. It began after the final betrayal. Michael had dealt with enemies before, men who had crossed him, who had dared to challenge his authority. But this time was different. The betrayal had come from within, from those closest to him, those he had trusted. And now, standing alone in his dimly lit study, Michael could feel the weight of that betrayal crushing him. It was as if the very walls of the Corleone estate were closing in around him. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when Michael started seeing shadows. They weren't the usual tricks of light or the fleeting movements one sees out of the corner of their eye. No, these shadows were different. They lingered, watching him from the corners of the room, waiting for him in the darkened hallways of his mansion. At first, Michael tried to ignore them, tried to convince himself that it was just the stress of running the family, the weight of too many decisions. But as the days passed, the shadows became more persistent. They followed him wherever he went, always just out of reach, always watching. One night, as Michael sat alone in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey, he heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, coming from the far corner of the room. Michael. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned, his eyes scanning the shadows, but there was no one there. Michael. The voice whispered again, louder this time, more insistent. The days turned into nights, and the whispers continued. They followed him through the halls of his estate, through the empty rooms, always calling his name, always reminding him of the choices he had made. Michael, you can't escape. It was his father's voice, Vito Corleone, calling to him from the shadows, reminding him of the legacy he had inherited, the life he had chosen. But there was something wrong with the voice, something twisted and cold. Michael tried to push it away, to focus on the business, but the shadows wouldn't let him. They grew darker, more oppressive, filling the rooms with a suffocating presence. And the whispers grew louder. Michael, the price must be paid. Michael's sleep was plagued with nightmares. He would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the echo of his father's voice still ringing in his ears. The mansion, once a symbol of his power, had become a prison. The shadows that lurked in the corners of every room had taken on shapes, familiar shapes. The faces of those he had lost, his brother Fredo, his wife Kay, even his father, appeared to him in the darkness, their eyes hollow, their mouths twisted into cruel smiles. They watched him from the shadows, their voices cold and accusatory.
You did this to us, Michael. You made us pay the price.
One evening, as Michael sat by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames, he saw it, a figure, standing just beyond the edge of the light. It was his father, Vito, but not as Michael remembered him. This Vito was a twisted, shadowy version of the man he had once been. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, and his voice was filled with a malice Michael had never heard before. You thought you could escape, Michael? Vito hissed, his voice low and menacing. You thought you could control everything? That there would be no price to pay? Michael's heart raced as the figure stepped closer, the shadows around him growing darker, more oppressive. The price must be paid, Michael, Vito whispered, his voice echoing through the room. And now, it's time. The room grew colder, the shadows closing in around Michael, suffocating him with their presence. He tried to stand, tried to move, but his legs wouldn't respond. He was trapped, frozen in place, as the shadowy figure of his father loomed over him. You took everything, Michael, Vito whispered, his voice cold and cruel. You destroyed everything, and now you will lose everything. Michael's breath came in ragged gasps, his mind racing with fear and regret. He had always known there was a price to be paid for power, but he had never imagined it would come to this. As the shadows closed in, Michael saw them, faces twisted and hollow, staring at him from the darkness. Fredo, Kay, Vito. They were all there, watching, waiting. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, their mouths twisted into cruel smiles. You can't escape, Michael, Fredo whispered, his voice soft and mocking. You made us pay the price. Now it's your turn. Michael's heart raced, his mind spinning with fear and regret. He had always been in control, always the one pulling the strings. But now, in the face of the shadows, he realized the terrible truth. He had never been in control. The shadows had always been there, lurking in the corners of his life, waiting for the moment when they could claim him. And now, that moment had come. As the shadows enveloped him, Michael Corleone, the once powerful head of the Corleone family, realized the price of power. It had cost him everything.